Hi. Now, one question I get asked a lot is, should I be doing sit-ups? Well, like every exercise really, there's a time and a place, and it might not be the right time and place for you. To do the kind of classical sit-up well and without risk of injury, be it gradual, insidious, or sudden and spontaneous, there needs to be quite a lot working. Your spine needs to be able to articulate, i.e. move at every joint quite evenly, so that as you're coming up into that sit-up position, there's not excessive force being placed at one segment. Perhaps there's stiff segments above and below, and one segment then gets very heavily loaded and therefore becomes more likely to be injured. You've got to have quite a lot of abdominal strength, so there needs to be good history of abdominal strength there. If there's a history of hernia or weakness or post-pregnancy or cesarean section, then all these sorts of things will factor into whether there's the requisite strength needed to perform a sit-up. Often if there's a weak link in the chain, whether it's weakness in that anterior abdominal wall or blocks or limitations in the mobility of the spine along the back side of the body, we kind of cheat and throw in momentum, so you get this big whipping effect, and that increased momentum and force is often the catalyst for injury. So because actually quite a few people, particularly the kind of people I would deal with who maybe have previous injury history or managing issues, or exercise is not something which comes naturally to them, because sit-ups can actually be fraught with problems, the abdominal prep and the oblique prep in the modified Pilates repertoire are a really good way to get that strengthening in the abdominal wall, to do it much more safely, and simultaneously strengthen those lumbo-pelvic stabilizers, which promote that Pilates powerhouse, that neutral lumbo-pelvic alignment, which is really the bedrock of most rehabilitation and core strengthening and Pilates exercise. So in this video, I'm going to go through how you perform the abdominal prep and the oblique prep, just the level ones of those exercises. And as I often do, when I've done that main demonstration, afterwards I'll bring in some modifications, because even that level one can provide problems for people, particularly in the shoulders and neck. So you'll need a mat, something comfortable to lie on, and it's performed from a starting position very similar to the rest position. That's lying on your back with your knees bent and your feet flat. So I'll teach that in just a moment. Just before we get down onto the mat, a quick word about visualization. It's a technique which I often teach and use myself. And in this exercise, we're going to be thinking about the belt line, i.e. the pelvis, and the lower rib cage. Our abdominal muscles essentially sit between those 2 points. So those are critical things to be thinking about when we perform the abdominal prep and the oblique prep. So let's get on with the tutorial now. We start the abdominal prep from the Pilates rest position. So our feet are parallel, the thighs are parallel, we're in a neutral lumbo-pelvic alignment, and typically that will have a little fingertip width gap underneath the base of your spine. You certainly don't want the spine flattened into the floor for this exercise. Think about the shoulders just being broadened slightly. Most of us will be quite tight in the chest, and that will cause us to round those shoulders up. So without too much force, you just want to think about weighting those shoulders down a little. Palms down on the floor by your side. Now, as I just mentioned, we've got the belt line and the rib cage. And so if we're going to be shortening the abdominal muscles, that gap will have to lessen. We don't want to move the belt line, because that will result in the pelvis posteriorly tilting, rolling backwards, and the spine flattening. So that element is what we draw towards, and our rib cage is going to do that for us. Now, because there's a lot of weight in the head and neck, as soon as we bring that element off the floor, it can put a lot of strain. So I will go through modifications to address that point after this initial demonstration, but I would tend to get people to start their abdominal prep with a little roll of their chin, just to bring that head fractionally off the floor. Once that's happened and we're in that little tuck position, we think about the rib cage being drawn towards our belt line. The arms just lift off the floor as well, and then we can lower back down with control. So at full speed, we take a breath in to prepare, breathe out, perform our abdominal prep, and then inhale to lower back down. So there's the basic movement. Now, because a lot of people may struggle to support the weight of the head, you don't want to be spending a great deal of time in that position where you've got maximal leverage of that head in relation to your torso. When you come up, we exhale to get that nice vacuum effect and drawing in that abdominal wall, and I'm ending up looking straight between my lower thighs. The hands come off the floor as well. We've got this nice sense of direction as we're looking down the room. It's exclusively generated by this visual imagery of the rib cage moving towards my belt line. But as I come up, I'm making sure that I've still got that fingertip gap underneath the base of my spine. So the difference between the Pilates abdominal prep and a sit-up would roll and bring that spine into a big flex position, and you get a lot more force going through things. Here, we're reinforcing that neutral lumbo-pelvic position, drawing the abdominal wall down towards that belt line, but critically maintaining that neutral position. With the oblique prep, we need to think in terms of oblique axes. So we kind of typically think about this X shape laid over the front of the torso, connecting one side of your rib cage to the opposite side pelvis. So you have those two diagonals going across the front of your stomach. With the oblique prep, you'd start off essentially the same as you did with your abdominal prep. Little head curl, draw the rib cage towards the belt line as before, but then at the end, you bring in the diagonal. So I'm going to bring my left rib cage towards my right hip. And I'm now just looking outside that point about 6 inches down from the knee. And then coming back down, and I can repeat to the other side. Start off coming centrally with that initiation of your abdominal prep, and then think about one rib cage moving towards that opposite hip, which brings in our oblique element. What I see quite a lot of here is an immediate tendency to go diagonal from the off. And you end up with this translation, this shift of the shoulders across to the body. So if I were to do this from a different angle, incorrectly, you would see an oblique prep with the right outside that parallel line of the body. And what we want to do is start off centrally, like we do with our abdominal prep. And as we bring in diagonal, you can't see that same amount of body outside, and you're just looking down the outside of the leg. Now this will prevent a lot of this unwanted folding and collapse in that lumbar-pelvic region. So what we're looking for is, as we come into our abdominal prep, the rib cage moves down and we're looking straight between the legs. And with the diagonal variant, the oblique prep, we're curling and then bringing in rotation in our thorax. It's not a hoiking round to the side and coming right outside that body line. So that's quite a critical element of the abdominal and oblique prep exercises. So there's the basic framework for those two staple classics of the modified Pilates technique. In the next section, I'm going to talk through some of the modifications which are very frequently needed to perform this exercise. Okay, onto some of the modifications. I'll use various bits of equipment in a moment, but I think one of the most obvious and most widely utilized modifications is the simple addition of your hands onto the back of your head. So if you think about the abdominal prep to begin with, remembering these modifications will be right for one person and not right for another, so they're just a guide. Interlock the back of your fingers and bring the head to nestle quite nicely in the back of the hands there. We also want to make sure that our elbows are very much in our peripheral vision. We don't want the elbows flat down to the floor here, they're quite kind of close in. So the hands now support the head, they're not pulling and forcing that neck into a significantly flexed position. It's just as a support mechanism, we're always driving the movement with that rib cage towards belt line visualization. So from your neutral start position, take that breath in, exhale, come up into a slight amount of neck flexion, and then that rib cage comes towards the belt line, nice flat stomach, exhaling, drawing in that lower belt line, and then we're coming back down. Try to keep that lower body beautifully still as you're performing your abdo prep, and visualize. Rib cage to belt line, drawing that belt line down as you come towards your finished position, but critically, you don't flatten the back. There shouldn't be any strain in the back of the neck. There should be a nice fluidity, smoothness to your movement, regardless of modification. For the oblique prep variation, you keep one hand in that back of the head position, and this will be done just towards that outstretched hand now. So we're doing unilateral oblique preps, curling up to start, almost like that kind of half abdominal prep, and then I'm going to bring my left rib cage towards my right hip, and I'm getting that rotation in the upper body. Remember, it's not a side bend. It's not drifting away from that center to take you outside your mat. Curl up, and there's this axis from that left shoulder to right hip, and the arm just floats. Inhale, prepare. Exhale, oblique prep. Inhale down. Now, one thing I see quite a lot of when this modification is being performed is the elbow coming across the body, wrenching across, giving this full sense of movement, and you're actually hiding the fact there's not a great deal of the correct pattern happening. Curl up into that abdominal prep start position, and then the rotation with the lift. Okay? Obviously the same the other way around. Now, a lot of people will find that that still puts quite a lot of strain through the neck, and there may be shoulder issues preventing one of those start positions. So that's when various bits of kit can come in handy. I've got a resistance circle here, which is one of these nice Pilates tools with a multitude of uses. And in this case, I'm going to use it to support the back of the head. And this really puts the shoulders in a much more comfortable position for those who find that sort of stuff not really attainable. We've got these little cushion pads on resistance circles, so the back of the head fits quite snugly, and it also gives you something just to bring your hands to hold on to at the top. Try to get the elbows the same width as your thighs. Put a little bit of pressure on your resistance circle. Take a breath in and breathe out to perform your abdominal prep. It's exactly the same pattern. Slight neck flexion to begin, and the hands are not pulling forcefully, they're just putting a little bit of bracing force there to cushion the weight of the head, and then from there the rib cage towards belt line. So again, I'm just looking at that point about 4 or 6 inches down from my knee level to finish off my abdominal prep. And this one really gets some lovely support for the head and neck, and my neck muscles here are relatively comfortable. There's not really any sensation of effort. Exhaling up, inhaling down. Exactly the same can be done with our oblique prep. We simply change into our oblique pattern, and it's kind of got that same feel to some of those sit-up machines you actually get in gyms. And so it just gives you that really nice support. Now, not everyone's going to have a resistance circle lying around, so you can use essentially anything. Got a towel here, you could do the same with a hoodie, jumper, whatever you've got. Just round the back of the head,
Bring those elbows in, nice cushion feeling there. And away we go. Little neck flexion to begin, rib cage to belt line. And there's our abdominal prep. Switching to our oblique prep. Keeping those legs lovely and still. And trying to get that beautiful pattern so we're staying in those parallel lines of the body. Remembering with that oblique prep, we don't want to drift out to the side. So some people say, is the abdominal prep, oblique prep sequence better than sit-ups? It's not a case of being better. One will be appropriate for one person, another will be appropriate for another. Sit-ups have a time and a place in high-end dynamic fitness movements, but for a lot of people, for the reasons I outlined at the beginning of the video, it's just not really something which is perhaps the best strategy for them. So hopefully you find, I know I do, you get really nice focused attention to those abdominal muscles and the obliques, and you do it in a way which really significantly lowers the risk of some of those sudden movement, momentum-based injuries which creep in and can be a real problem to fix if that's all you've done for a long period of time. So there's the introduction to the level 1 of the Pilates abdominal prep and oblique prep. I'll talk through the more advanced levels in the video to come. Thanks for joining. Good luck.